I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, who's going to be talking on DIE, or DEI. And his name is Emery Koenig, so it's a German name. K-O-E O-E is pronounced A. So he's going to be speaking to us. So a little bit about Emery. Okay. Here it is. Aha. So, Emery, this is a pretty impressive resume you have. All right. So he's retired vice chairman and chief risk officer of Cargill. He was elected to Cargill's board of directors in 2010 and was a member of Cargill corporate leadership team, a core executive group, and in charge of Cargill's overall strategy, growth, and funding. Are we all familiar with Cargill? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Koenig had previously served as platform leader for their agricultural supply chain platform, as well as energy, transportation, and metals platform. Kind of commodities, I'd say. He also had responsibilities for Cargill's corporate transportation, logistics, and warehousing function. Plus, he headed Cargill's philanthropy committee, commodity risk committee, and the enterprise process data and technology committee. He also served in the business conduct committee and the people team. Excuse me. He joined Cargill in 1978. He held various leadership positions in the international commodity trading and risk management areas. During his 15-year tenure in Geneva, Switzerland, his responsibilities included worldwide commodity trading and risk management, the Middle East Africa region, including offices in Casablanca, Cairo, Johannesburg, and palm oil refining and trading businesses in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. It just brings to mind the Maltese Falcon, where he's been. All right. He's currently a board member of Mosaic Company, which is another commodities firm. He's board chairman of Focolare Media. He's a member of the board of Moto Hope Mission School in Nakuru, Kenya, the St. Paul Seminary Board, and the Catholic Rural Life Board. And he's chairman of St. Thomas University Catholic Studies Advisory Board. So he holds a degree in business management from the University of North Dakota, where he also played 4 years of basketball. He's married with 4 children and 4 grandchildren. Well done, sir. Come on up and talk to us about DEI.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you this evening. You're probably wondering what a 67-year-old gray-haired white guy is going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we'll see how it goes. I'm counting on your charity to work with me. I also resonated. Well, I got to know Roger Vasco. He and I were on the Catholic Rural Life board together, and I had chaired the grants committee for quite a few years, and Roger was on the grants committee with, and that's how I got to know Roger. And I think this is probably the 3rd or 4th time you've asked me to try to speak. We finally got the calendars to match up, so thank you for that. And also just the St. Joseph's Guild. I've read a book and watched or heard Father Don Calloway. Are anyone familiar with Father Don Calloway, The Consecration of St. Joseph? It's kind of a life-changing book, and I really have a much more of a profound, deep appreciation for what St. Joseph brought to the table in terms of raising Christ, teaching him to be a man, teaching him about all the things in work, and I really was fortunate that we can bring him to life. And the other person, we talk about careers and how do you make it through a career of 38 years in a global agricultural company. I have to rely on this lady behind me here, our mother. It's a very close relationship. You have to do that to be with her. So anyway, tonight we want to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a very complex topic. I just heard from some of the comments around the table. It's not an easy topic. It's a hot-button topic that we've heard about before. It's not necessarily wrong, but it simply doesn't go far enough, which is really the issue. And it's also a blunt instrument. And you look at a lot of, and we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about the metrics and the rigidity and the tyranny of the metrics that get caught up and really people are hiding behind those metrics as one way to bring about diversity and a better work environment, and actually it's starting to backfire, which we'll also talk about. And I think for many organizations, the whole reassessment of taking on the DEI thing is starting to back up, and so we want to spend a little bit of time talking about that tonight. And so we put together a very simple agenda here. We'll talk a little bit some background and context setting. I'll talk a little bit about Cargill, the DEI shortfalls. I will share experiences tonight. And the reason I got involved with this whole DEI thing was Dr. Michael Naughton, who was Don Briel's successor, I guess, with the Catholic Studies program. When I first retired in 2016, Dr. Michael Naughton asked me to give a talk to a group at St. Thomas and on subsidiarity. First thing I did is go home and find out what subsidiarity was. I mean, I really, it was not on my screen, it was not on my radar. But I'll tell you, the more I dug into that, the more I read about it, the more I recognized that there's a lot of things that I was doing, a lot of things, we use different words even at Cargill, and I want to share some of those experiences with you. And then I'll also reference a little later in the talk, Dr. Michael Naughton had this idea that this was an issue. This is an issue in universities. It's an issue in business. I think we've all have some scars on our back from situations that have come up where they've been very difficult to handle with a lot of external pressure coming from either shareholders or enterprise resource groups. And how do you handle those as a Catholic? And I want to share some examples of how we do that. And so Dr. Michael Naughton and I wrote a paper, and then we went to Budapest, Hungary last June, a year ago in June, presented the paper at a conference, and then since then there's two different versions of the paper have been published because we found there's a lot of interest, a lot of demand, a lot of people in the business world, especially Catholic, feel trapped somewhat in terms of the pressure that's coming down from the DEI metrics as opposed to what we're called to live in our Catholic faith going forward. So. The questions are, how do we, is DEI is really good for corporate America? How do we create a more just and equitable institutions? How do we include people who have been and are currently excluded by discriminatory practices? And how do we equitably treat employees? And some of the things that we asked ourselves and we dug into. And the challenge is, however, whether this movement is giving the right answers to the questions. And I think that's where it gets down to, it's probably the right question to ask, but what is the answer? What is the Catholic response to the answer? And again, tonight, I'm not going to get too much into the theology of that. I think Dr. Michael did a great job. If you want to read the papers, I've got links to that. I'll share at the end of the paper. My contribution to the paper was real live experiences. And it's kind of rare to have a practitioner, which I would call myself a practitioner, and a theologian working together to really address these issues. And I think it gave a lot more breadth and depth and background to dealing with the issue going forward, and to try to address this thing to make it a lot more rich of a discussion by going deeper as we go forward. And from what I've seen a lot, and this comes from my commodity background, it is really more or less playing not to lose in a lot of ways, trying to keep, again, shareholders or enterprise resource groups off your back as opposed to necessarily running a better business. And we're going to talk about that going forward here. So, in the influence on corporate culture and also even in your university's culture, and I guess I work fairly closely with St. Thomas and I chair the board for the Catholic Studies program, and also on the seminary board, and we've had several issues on the seminary being affiliated with the University of St. Thomas, and how do we as a seminary work with and be affiliated with the University of St. Thomas, which has taken particular steps relative to DEI issues and how they want to have those handled versus how you want to handle those as a seminary. And you can appreciate the fact those are going to be very, very different. And so the challenges for the DEI approach is not so much that reform shouldn't take place, but how that reform needs to take place going forward. And that's how we got into subsidiarity. And we've got a couple slides here. We'll get into more detail and more examples of what that subsidiarity is, but really it comes down to really what comes first. And it really, I think that's where the DEI puts the numbers first. the identity first as opposed to the gifts. And I think we as Catholics are called to look at the respect of each individual and to bring those gifts first, and the identity has got to come second. And C.S. Lewis, and I just want to quote C.S. Lewis, and this was included in our paper, he said, "You cannot get second things by putting them first. You can get second things only by putting first things first." And if we put first things first and second things are thrown in, they find their proper place. But if we put second things first, such as identity, in the long run, we lose both the first and the second thing. And therein lies the problem. That's really gets to the bottom line of this whole thing. Yep.
What's corporate resource group?
Enterprise resource groups. And so, for example, at Cargill, I was the executive sponsor for the Women's Enterprise Resource Group. We had blacks, we had the LGBT, we probably had the Hispanic, et cetera, et cetera. And those, we can talk a lot more about those because there's a positive side to those, but I'll tell you, they also can very easily cause disengagement and isolation and separation as opposed to really trying to build a more diverse workforce in a positive, healthy way. So, but thank you for clarifying that. These are a couple points I pulled off, and I don't know if you can read those. And it really started to blow up really after the George Floyd situation we had here, very, very unfortunate situation we had here in Minneapolis. As it became supercharged when nobody really wanted to criticize, and if they did, they were considered a racist. Second of all, U.S. companies spend roughly $8 billion on DEI training, and this is also another problem in terms of DEI training, which is not mandatory by law, mandated by law. It's entirely optional. The problem is if you're against the intrusiveness of the DEI training, you must be discriminatory, standing for inequality or exclusion. That's where the game gets played, if you don't stand up and support those things going forward. We now have in some publishing houses, we got authenticity readers, which are telling publishing companies which are acceptable depictions of marginalized groups who is entitled to tell their voices. I mean, that's a big oh my. University of Michigan has 163 DEI personnel. The average university has 45, call them diversicrats if you want to. They're accountable to nobody. By telling themselves that they're making the world a better place, they get to throw their weight around. And this has been a significant problem. I think we've all seen that, especially those who are in the education or university setting. We've also seen applicants on tenured track positions, math or physics, are being rejected if their DEI statements are found wanting. And there's also a quote by Thomas Jefferson when we talk about equality, that there's nothing more unequal than equal treatment of unequal people. And I think that really gets to the heart of the issue where you're failing to recognize the gifts that people are bringing to the table. Okay, now we're going to switch to a little bit of the background so you can set some context, because that was the DEI setup as far as we're going forward. And this is a picture of my family. There's a little bit of diversity in there from a race standpoint. I've got 2 biological children, my oldest, Christina and John, and then we adopted 2 children from Peru when they were babies. And it was really a beautiful experience, our family, not easy experience, to bring on, to spend a lot of time in Peru, to adopt. My wife had fertility problems, which led us into the adoption, and it ended up being a very great way to build a family. It may not be for everyone in terms of the adoption process, but for us it really worked. And the issue it gets into for us, and I think you mentioned, Bob, in terms of spending 15 years in Geneva, Switzerland, I actually worked there 10. And then our son, Joseph, on the far left side, he's got learning disabilities. And so we had to decide, and we looked at a lot of different options to get him the help. And as you probably know, young children with learning disabilities, there's a couple of statistics that are quite interesting. 70% of prison inmates are learning disabled. And the problem is, if in grades 1, 2, 3, you learn to read, and beyond that, you read to learn. And if you don't get the reading down early on in life, you get ostracized, you get put off to the side, you get involved with the wrong group, your frustration levels explode, your behavior gets out of control, and you really end up in a bad place. And we really didn't want that happen to our son. And so I told Cargill I got to go back to Minneapolis. We found a school, Groves Academy, which Joseph graduated from, and I had the best job in the world. I mean, I love my job in Geneva as a global trading head for agricultural commodities. And went home that night and woke up at about 3 in the morning with an idea. I have an idea. How about if I kept my job in Geneva, but did it from Minneapolis by video and commuted back and forth 2 weeks every 2 months? And it wasn't an ideal situation, but it's very, very workable. A lot of things had to change on my end because when you pull yourself, I sat right at the trading floor. We had 104 people on the trading floor. It was a high risk, high reward business, very volatile. One of the more successful businesses in Cargill. And to sit in your basement in Waconia, Minnesota by video when your entire team is in Geneva took a little bit of a change of mindset on my side relative to how do I build the leadership skills of those people who were reporting directly to me. And that's all I had was those people and building their leadership skills going forward. And yep, there was a few scary moments. The hard part was you just couldn't hang around the water cooler anymore. But I had a private office with a video system up there so I could beat them upstairs and have a private conversation if we needed to do that. And then going back and forth 2 weeks every 2 months is workable. So if anyone here is whinging about a long commute, I have no sympathy for you. And also, I would just add, our results started to improve, and they were very good. They even got better. And why is that? I guess you can easily say, well, it's clear you were not there. That could be the easy answer. But I think we really started to tap the talent and the gifts that were amongst the team and just getting that team to play together. And I think it was my first light bulb that went on in terms of the importance of subsidiarity and how you really get those gifts. You find the gifts, you build the gifts, and then you get the gifts to work together going forward here. So that's my family. There's more diversity to that picture than meets the eye, and we can talk about that later if you wish. But that's our family and where I spend my time on. So just a little bit about Cargill. We have roughly 155,000 employees in 70 countries. We've been around 155 years. It's still a private company owned by the Cargill and Macmillan families. We do business in 125 countries, and one of the reasons I retired was spending way too much time on airplanes visiting those 70 countries. It just eventually got a little bit worn down with all the international travel, plus all the other hats I was wearing at the time. But it's a very good company, and I'm very proud to say that I worked for them for 38 years, start to finish, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. As you can see, we got 70% of our employees are outside the U.S., so you're really dealing in an international arena. I've done a lot of mentoring with people in terms of how do you communicate with, how do you appreciate, how do you get people to communicate with them and to work with them when you've got Brazilians and Chinese and Russian and Ukrainian and Portuguese, et cetera, all across the globe, and you try to use more simple language, avoid the American slang, always respect their country, et cetera. So there's a lot of ways you can really bring the gifts of subsidiarity to a global company when you're working forward with them. This is a slide. I know you can't read all the things. There's one thing I want to talk about here is our guiding principles. Cargill is a highly, highly ethical company. I was told when I started with Cargill, Cargill will never do anything to embarrass you, and don't you ever do anything to embarrass Cargill. And I understood that from day one, that in terms of the ethics and how you want to do that, and we eventually got to a one strike, you're out. And so you could be a 30-year employee, and if you got involved, and it wasn't so much what you did, is what you did after you did it that got people into trouble. And all we'd ask people, being on the Business Conduct Committee, just get your hand up. Just let us help you. I mean, if you made a mistake or whatever it is, let us help you out. Please do not bury that issue. And that's where really everyone gets into a lot of problems when you do that. And therefore, we had to terminate employees, and it's got teeth. I mean, we don't monkey around with the ethics because we have one brand, one reputation, and it can be destroyed by one person doing the wrong thing, and so it's very important. And so therefore, my advice to young people coming up, just to find a company who your personal ethics are consistent with those ethics of the company, and I think it really made my life a lot easier to deal in that environment, being in a very ethical situation going forward. And therefore, our guiding principles, which again have teeth, just simply, we obey the law, we conduct our business with integrity, we keep honest and accurate records, we honor our business obligations, we treat people with dignity and respect, We protect Cargill's information assets. We're committed to be a responsible global citizen. I mean, these are very, very simple, and they're plastered everywhere in every Cargill facility you'll see. Those guiding principles are up, and it's been a great foundation, including working for a family company, because being on the board, you get to know the family very well, quite frankly. And the family shareholders wanted asked us, the following things. They wanted a company that they can be proud of, because this is a company, they only had one stock. It was the Cargill, and they couldn't sell it. I mean, it's all privately held. So they couldn't sell it. So it was a company they can be proud of. They wanted to have a noble purpose. They wanted to have a growth company, one that's survivable. Even the 2008 washouts, they want to make sure that they can survive with that one stock. And obviously, they want to be profitable going forward. And it was good. I mean, for my 150 years when was around 150 years when I retired. And it was interesting, I was around for 25% of that journey that Cargill was on. And got to know them very well as far as the family and how they conducted. And no family's perfect, let's be clear, but they're good people, very good people. So now I want to spend a little time talking about one of my examples called strategic intent. And so Cargill, 1865, we'd been around 150 years. We had significant growth, global company that had really, but what had started to happen was that our earnings started to flatten out. And the culture was getting a little bit, I'll say flat, quite frankly. We're just losing our competitive edge. And we also had a bit of a cowboy culture. I mean, it's really a command and control culture from that standpoint. And I remember I attended one of the, it's called Future Focused Leadership sessions, and we all did these emotional intelligence. You probably have done some of those for the group and also for each of us individually. One of the things that came up on ours, my score and the score of our group had empathy at 0. In fact, our table goes, empathy. What's empathy? We had to look it up in the dictionary. It was so far off our screen, what empathy, because it was just not how you were raised in Cargill. It was just whoever pounded their fist hardest, whoever screamed the loudest, whoever was the most aggressive got their way. And so anyway, it was the beginning of a change, because we recognized you cannot run a company, a global company like that, with the command and control. People weren't going to put up with it anymore, quite frankly. So at that session that we had with Future Focused Leadership, Greg Page at the time had this exercise, and he stood up and says, okay, give me examples of the best person you ever worked for. Fun, energy, we performed better than we thought we would, all these positive things. And also, then he had a list of adjectives he wanted from the group, saying, give me the worst person you ever worked for in Cargill. And the list was multiple times longer. It was scary how long that list was in terms of the worst person you've ever worked for in Cargill. Here's the adjectives that came up: demoralizing, didn't care, arrogant, self-centered, workaholic, defensive, micromanager, treated you like a pawn on a chessboard. Here's my favorite one: made you feel like a gutted deer on the hood of a car. This is the culture. And we had one president of one of the divisions. We actually had a name for him. It's called Dr. Death. I mean, he would suck the life out of anything. It was just incredible. Anyway, the point, Cargill recognized we had to stop. We could not perform this way anymore. And that's where we started putting a lot more emphasis on leadership. And here's where the whole notion of subsidiarity came from. And the CEO at the time, Warren Staley, he gave him full marks for really bringing up the change, and he was not going to back off. In fact, we were going through, actually he was sitting in the room when we had this exercise, and Warren was sitting there, and I raised my hand. I said, Warren, what do you think about this? And he said, without blinking an eye, we're almost done. Of the top 30 to 50 people in Cargill, about 40 of those were gone. Respectfully, but they even opted out, or they just were not going to, change as we needed to change relative to leadership, relative to really bringing the life from the bottom up of the organization. They just could not get off the command and control. They thought Cargill was nuts, and they didn't want any part of it. So all these things were handled very well, but it was a complete change of house, large change of house, as you can imagine, at the senior levels. And we wanted to get more into engaging the hearts and minds of employees, to every employee knew where they fit and why they mattered, which is a really big deal. Every employee needs to know that where they fit and why they mattered. Having deep relationship with customers. I worked in Geneva, and we, actually we publicly stated customers are the enemy. They cause problems, they make us work, they don't pay, they screw it up, da-da-da-da. So we had to change our mindset around customers also, and thank God we did that. We wanted to be the best company in the world at nourishing people. It was very important for Cargill. We wanted to increase our corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility. We want to be a good corporate citizen. We want to be a good custodian of the environment. So all these things really caused a major change in terms of the corporate environment. And one thing I have to also go back to Greg Page, who I worked for. He was a CEO at the time. He had this philosophy called, it's called holding each other able. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean Galen, I'll just pick on you. Galen, I'm assuming Galen does his job properly. I'm assuming Galen's capable of doing his job, and I'm going to treat Galen that way, right? That is very energizing. That's also an example of subsidiarity where we're giving Galen the respect that he deserves as a human being in terms of how we treat Galen going forward. And I have worked for, and my guess some of you have worked for people who held you disabled. Every day was trying to prove yourself. Every day was trying to prove that you're worthy, or you could perform, you could do the job, et cetera. And that is just very, very wearing on a culture. And I think that was very helpful, and I really resonated with me to work for Greg. And I can see how Subsidiarity helped Cargill through a significant culture transformation. It wasn't easy, because one of the things that we had to get used to, Cargill was horrendous at recognition. I mean, we just, if you did something well, fine, thank you, we're on to the next best thing. I personally also didn't need a lot of recognition. I came from a German Catholic family. I played basketball. If you won the game, that was a meets expectation. That's no big deal. Let's go on to the next game, right? Not a big deal. But other people are different, and we had to learn about recognition, because a lot of people need and want recognition. And so finally our CEO stood up and goes, we like people, people like recognition, we will like recognition. I mean, we had to get our minds around how do we get out of that? Okay, another example. This is on metrics. Excuse me, I'm going to take a step here. This we're going to get to a little bit of the Tyranny of Metrics. If you want to read a great book, it's by Frank Mueller, literally called The Tyranny of Metrics. And he goes through all different facets of business, education, et cetera, and how people are using metrics really to, in a very skewed way, for a variety of different reasons. And so one of the boards I was sitting on, I do sit on, we have our usual DEI presentation by HR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at a certain point, I raised my hand going, diversity of what and diversity for what? Please tell me what those what do you think those are? And so she went through, in this case it was a she, it was all about the numbers. They wanted to have 30% women in the workforce, 30% growth in underrepresented groups, 30% of leadership diversity, 30% of community giving to diversity and inclusion activities to be accomplished by 2030. That was that. And the for what was the fact that we had lack of diversity leaders makes it difficult for women and minority employees to envision themselves at higher levels of the organization, and now they feel less connected, including when underrepresented. And here comes the problem, and this is where I push back, and I'm still pushing back in this situation, because if we do not keep our priorities straight, we're going to end up with unintended consequences down the road, such as causing resentment and disunity in the organization because of how that, if those get pushed too far, and it ends up being a lose-lose for the employees and also for the corporation. And lastly, my point was to her, and I keep bringing this up also, if we truly had a culture of treating each person with respect and dignity all humans deserve, I doubt we'd be having this conversation. That is the bottom line. If in fact we were treating Galen as Galen deserves to be treated, we don't need to talk about DEI. We don't need to have forced metrics in there. But the problem is we're broken human beings, as we all know, and we've got work to do from that standpoint. The other example I want to talk about here, when we talk about imposing metrics, because we've got 70% of the population is Hispanic, 14% is black. Okay, Galen, you're my man. I'm going to pick on you. What percentage of the NFL are people of color? Okay, 70%. NBA, 74%. Why are they in their roles? Because they're good. They're the best at what they do, not because they're black, not because we're going to take, oh, hang on a second, we have to have 17% Hispanic, we need to have X percent female, we need to have X. That doesn't make any sense, right? It's there because of their gifts they're bringing to the table. The whole color thing is just not relevant for that discussion. And so which is the hard part, because it's easy to measure, and we'll get into that, easy to measure, and that's the problem with these metrics. It's easy to measure black and white, male and female, at least historically it's been easy to measure those things. But what you're looking for is diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background, diversity of et cetera. And I think it actually came up in Mueller's book, that if in fact you take a group of diverse, massively racial diverse college students, you put them in the same class with the same professor, and they all graduate at the same time with the same degree, you put them in there, that is a disaster for diversity, because they all think the same. And therein lies the problem, where we want people to look different but think the same, and that really defeats the point of diversity, which is what you're leading for. The problem is it's hard to measure that, and that's why corporations default by going to race or gender from that standpoint. Okay, another case in point, 2. Another board I'm on, I sit on the governance and nominating committee, which is responsible for recruiting board members. So we got a call we did get a call from one of our large shareholders saying that they have I'll use my word, rigid requirement of 30% diversity on the boards, and if in fact it's below that, they have to give a no vote to the governance executive committee, because we're elected every year in this case. So the problem was we had one female director step off. She became the chairman of the board of another company, and so therefore our numbers dropped from 30 to 27%. So we all on the governance committee got a no vote from this large shareholder. The ironic part was there's a black male on our governance committee and a female on our committee. They got a no vote because of this rigid policy that this shareholder probably had pressured from their investors, being fixated upon that. And therefore, it makes absolutely no sense. It is just the bizarre nonsense of that type of thinking going forward. But it is what it is, and I think that therein lies some of the faults and problems when you talk about the diversity fixation on metrics, and the damage they can do to organizations. So when you get into the whole measurement, measurement's important, but not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And therein lies the challenge with trying to measure and become obsessed with these metrics, which are very easy to put forth, and quite frankly, I think people in general hide behind those because, well, my metric's 30%, therefore I have to vote no. Where's the common sense? Where's the thought process in terms of how we're thinking about that, as opposed to hiding behind a rigid metric? Yes, Bob?
So, like that shareholder, would that be a large fund complex that was underlying?
Correct. It's exactly what it was. Exactly. And I'm also aware of several situations since I left Cargill where there were 2 or 3, I'll speak in generalities here, high-performing males who were taken out so we can put in a minority person in those roles. And I think that's a disaster, in my opinion. And I have to bite my lip when I go back for the annual shareholder, or the annual directors' luncheon that we have, because I just think it's really a problematic, not only for the corporation to have that being visible, but for the poor person who has to step into that role when everyone see the reason why they're there, and the reason why a white male got taken out was because of their, in this case, they were female. And I love females, it's not the issue. The point is, what are we really doing here, and driving those metrics so hard just to get our promises, public promises, put into to fulfill those going forward here. Another one example I have is that who does employee engagement surveys here? It's fairly common. it's fairly common. I think they're still being done, right? You're still doing them? Good. I find them very helpful. I'm a super big champion of them. And we started, I think, most of the, they were all over the map. When you got, at the time, we had 104 business units at Cargill. I think we're down to 74. We just consolidate them. But anyway, so all we asked of the business unit leader, all we want from you is upward progression. You could be at 40, you could be at 70, you could be at 10, whatever. All we want to do is year after year, we want to keep that going forward here. And so we had a, and all we really wanted measured was if people are willing to say, stay, and support Cargill. Those are the three questions that were embedded in the survey. That's all we really wanted to know. And so in Japan, we got the survey results. This goes back to metrics and how they can be a bit goofy. We got very low scores. What was the question? The question was, would you tell your friends and family good things about Cargill? They said, no, we can't do that. And we said, what is happening here? What is happening here? And until we dug into it, they didn't want their friends to feel bad. Because Cargill was such a great company, they didn't want their friends to feel bad by telling them it was a great company. So therefore, you take the metrics at face value, it looks like a disaster until you dig into really what's going on behind that. Last example I'll give on the, we had a problem when I first got to Geneva with lawsuits. We had such an aggressive attitude. We didn't care what the economics were. If someone screwed us, we were going right after them, and we got to set the tone. And I had a Dutch boss, Hugh Spearing, so I just went to his funeral last July, God bless him. And we were very much hung up on the principle of the idea and versus getting some economic common sense in there. And so anyway, what we recognized that even if we were winning, we were losing economically. And we really started to try to commercially settle stuff because even if you were, again, winning, you were losing, and we're spending so much time and effort on these things. They just suck time and energy, lawsuits do. Whether you're the trader, the contract desk, et cetera. And so we set in all kinds of processes to choose our customers better, to have our contracts reviewed before they were sent out, to consolidate our contracts through a contract desk, and we spent a lot more time making money and having fun as opposed to getting sucked into disputes. But as only started measuring those and trying to recognize what's really going on behind that, do we recognize that we actually need to change our approach and really try to settle these things commercially versus trying to do it. And the other thing we realized also is that the worst thing you can do to a competitor is give him a bad customer. He'll suck their resources right down the toilet. So we won't get into that's business. Okay, so in terms of managing a global trading business, and so what do we do to help reorder the DEI? Did I skip a slide here? No, I don't think so. How do we reorder DEI? And I always looked at, from my standpoint, especially in running a global trading business, as an orchestra conductor, setting clear expectations, what I wanted to see and what I didn't want to see. And a leader's primary role is to build other leaders, not to build followers. And I think it's really important that people understand that in terms of your leadership skills. And therefore, that's what I did, is really worked hard to try to build their leadership skills, especially when I sat in Waukoni, Minnesota, managing a global business. That's all I had was their leadership skills going forward. And yes, you do have to address the performance issues. I always looked at it as the blueberry, the basket of blueberries. If you get one blueberry that's bad, you've got to get that one blueberry out so the other 100 don't go bad. And we had a situation in South Africa where the manager down there, who was not from South Africa, he was from one of the European countries, I caught wind, actually our HR manager caught wind of him passing around to the male traders in the office in Johannesburg soft porn video clips that apparently he was using to build funny bonding relationship with the male traders down there. And I caught wind, we addressed it, and put a stop to it. Obviously, put a stop to it. But ultimately, these people opt out because they either think I was nuts or he just was not going to put up with that in the House of Cargill anymore, and we were not going to tolerate that. And I think it's really important that you put down, or at least not miss opportunities to communicate clearly what you stand for and what you won't stand for. And I wasn't going to stand for that. And all the male traders are the ones who were calling us, saying, please help make this stop. And so it was really an odd situation. But it's one of those things. And so I never walked away from those situations, because you have to deal with it. And actually, the next time I went down to Johannesburg, there was a line around the conference room of people walked in to thank you for dealing with this situation, because there's other issues that were starting to show up, and they all got reflected in the employee engagement scores and in the results. So it was all a combination of things. But anyway, don't be afraid to walk towards those things when dealing with people issues. And there's always a tendency, well, sorry, he's got 4 kids, which this guy did at the time. He's got 4 kids. We have to do. Okay, we can try to help him. We set the line clear, what we want to do. But I'm sorry, out is out, and we've got to think about the other 99 people, not the one. And so therefore, you got to get that bad blueberry out of there. Another example I had was we had a corporate center meeting with the top 35 people in Cargill, and we came up with this exercise, including the CEO, had to stand up and say 2 things. One, give me, in the last 6 years, what you've been most proud of at Cargill, what you've done. And the second, what you've been most sorry about in the last 6 years. I don't know why I put 6 years on it. 80% of those sorries was on dealing with the problem employee. They knew it. They saw it. They didn't want to deal with it. They're the ones who put them in place. They didn't want to admit they were wrong, et cetera. And so we just had to really think about what really is our role to the 99 people who really deserve better leadership than what we're giving them. I think it was very important to do that. And the other thing I learned is an organization's culture is influenced by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. That's what influences your culture. Is what is the behavior, your worst employee, what you're willing to tolerate. So, moving right along. So what do we do in terms of reordering DEI? There's one that's personal leadership, and the other one is going to be on structural change, and those are the ones I want to talk about now. Are we doing okay so far? I know I'm speaking fast, but I'm trying to be watching the clock here. Doing okay? Okay. Okay, let's talk about personal leadership first. One of the things at Cargill was the heart of leadership was integrity, conviction, and courage. This whole notion of playing to win, not playing not to lose, being part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think the principle of subsidiarity helps us articulate not just what we are against, but also what we are for. And I think it's important because it's so easy to hold your hand up saying, oh, well, I don't agree with that, et cetera. Okay, what do you want to do? How do you want to handle this? What are you going to stand for, et cetera? And how do we encourage richer concepts of diversity gifts that are necessary to achieve the purpose within the organization? And helping others to charitably express their thoughts and experience an idea. That's one of the pet peeves I have these days, and I'm guilty of it myself. If I'm in a meeting, actually I got this feedback one time. My direct reports told me, Emery, we don't know why you're having the meeting. Okay, so that was causing confusion. And so what I started to do was, if we're going to have a meeting, and we have 4 choices here. One choice, I've already made up my mind. I just want to socialize this with you and get your ideas on it. But that's one of the rules we can live by. Second of all, depending on the subject, we all have an equal vote. Let's just kick this around and decide what we want to do together, because should we order pizza or hamburgers tonight, for example? And the third one, for example, is I need to make a decision. I would like your inputs, but I'd like to make a decision. So, for example, if people just know what those rules of the game are, they're so much clearer in how they want to do that, and they're willing to engage on that, and they have no problem with that. If you want to make the decision, it's no problem. Just tell me. And I think it was a real big learning for me on my end relative to my leadership and how I hopefully became more effective by just being more transparent and more open with them. And also the other thing that was really helpful at Cargill, and something I was really proud of and I tried to encourage, is allowing people to think out loud. What a gift. If you can, and I think we're losing that. I think it's one of the whole points of this whole DEI discussion, where people are so afraid to speak up anymore because they don't want to get canceled. And the culture is turning to one of a cancel culture as opposed to allowing people to think out loud. And if you can get your organization, your corporation, your university, whatever, to go back to the days where you can think out loud, what a gift. That's where innovation's at. That is where things can really start bubbling forward if you can bring that forward of thinking out loud. And it's something I really try hard. Now, how can I as a leader kill that? I can kill that by, okay, tell me what you think, here's what I think. And I speak too quickly, and I don't let the group socialize that, bring it out. And I really work hard biting my tongue, being the last one to speak. And again, tell them what the rules of the game are, but be the last one to speak, because if not, I just kill it. And you talk about, so we can have a massive diverse group, and if I bring the group in and say, okay, here's what we're going to do, what are we doing? I mean, we just kill the whole notion of having diverse experiences, diverse in thoughts, if no one can get those on the table, including the fact you've got introverts and extroverts. And the world rewards extroverts because they're all, chatting, always having a microphone. Why are you laughing, Bob? But because it hurts. But the point is, and I went to a seminar called Leadership at the Peak in Colorado Springs one time, and the best definition I've ever heard for introverts and extroverts. Introverts have a loudspeaker inside their head. They don't need to speak. They can hear everything they're thinking. And these poor extroverts, they have no speaker. They've got to speak it so they can think it. My mom was the ultimate extrovert. If she was thinking it, you were hearing it, because that's the only way she could think through these things. So the point is, I had to stop, especially to bring Asians into a global environment, or Latin Americans into a global environment with the Dutch, et cetera, Germans, they just they just tell you what they think in very few words and very honest. But so you have to sometimes slow things down and call out those people who are not as comfortable. So it's one more thing you can do is diversity in terms of your leadership. And before I went to Geneva, Cargill sent me and my wife to a Swiss enculturation class in Chicago. And I'll never forget, there's a graph the guy put up there, and he just had a line. He goes, okay, this is how many words it takes to express a thought. Okay, guess who's down here at the bottom who needs very few words? Which culture needs very few words? Dutch, German, Polish, just very direct. I don't like your tie. It's nothing personal. I don't like your tie. Okay, it's no problem. And at the other extreme, Asian, Latino tends to, I like your shoes, I like your pants. Boy, that's a nice coat. They will not come out because it's so impolite to say that I don't like your tie. And that's one thing, I've had some hard lessons, especially on the Latino side. It's culturally unacceptable to bring you bad news. Are very indirect. They love, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but it's a generalization. I'm just sharing what the class professor said, right? So don't cancel me. The Asians are very, very indirect. So you really have to learn. They'll talk around the issues. You got to wait them out, et cetera. The problem I learned was with Americans. They waffle. They waffle in between. They will tell you, oh yeah, Galen, you have a problem. You just bring that right to me. That's nonsense. They have they say nice things. Oh yeah, we're going to have this kind of candid conversation. They got very, very soft underbellies. I learned that the hard way, being outside the U.S. for way too long and dealing with way too few words with my American brethren when I was outside the U.S. And it really had to learn. It was a cultural hard lesson for me to learn. But I'm trying to do better. Always just try to be respectful from that standpoint. We had another situation. We doing okay, Roger? Okay. We were on a trip to McDonald's in Canada. And we met with the CEO, and this is our Future Focused Leadership Group. This is back when I was 25 years with Cargill and a business unit leader. And they were making no uncertain. McDonald's is Cargill's largest customer. And they're saying, well, yeah, we're going to take 20% out of our supply chain. Okay, guess what? That's us. We're supplying you chicken, the biscuits, the hamburgers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we got back to Minneapolis, and we had a person who's now deceased. He was one of the senior leaders who was responsible for our group at the time. His first name was Dave. And he just said, boy, how about that Cargill and McDonald's relationship? Isn't that something? And I'll tell you, the strangest part was no one in our group said a word. We knew where we just came from. We knew what we just heard from McDonald's in Canada. And everyone was afraid to speak up about what we just heard. Why was that? And so that night we had dinner at Greg Page's house, and I said, Greg, we had a situation today. Tell me why we heard what we heard. Here's what we heard. We came back and we all wimped out, right? Because this is a pretty strong, old school type individual that was leading our class. And the next day we got into the class and we talked about candor. Who's got a good definition of candor here? Go ahead. It's getting the truth out quick. And I'll tell you, in business, when things are moving, you've got to get the truth out quick. And so you need to have your cost of candor low, not free, but low enough where people are willing to bring you the truth quick. Now you can operate. Another good book, if you want to read it, is The Speed of Trust, and how since 9/11, we don't trust each other anymore. Look at the tax it causes us to go through an airport now because we don't trust each other anymore. As opposed to before, we have the speed of trust. You can get things done. It's a dividend, and that's what you want to build in your corporate culture is that trust levels, and get the candor so people are willing to bring you to the truth. Everyone out there knows it, but if they're not willing to bring it to you, you're in deep trouble because you're going to be the last one to find out, and it's going to be very, very painful to do that. And so we learned a very good lesson in terms of the cost of candor and how do you work on keeping that cost of candor low, not free, but low enough where people are willing to bring you the truth. Another good learning lesson relative to personal leadership. Another thing, another sip of water here. This is a major mindset change in my world, coming from a chess player, command and control, to be a gardener. We're focused on shaping the ecosystem versus moving pieces around on the chessboard. And this is subsidiarity. This is really getting people to appreciate what they bring to the table. A gardener plants and harvests, but more than anything, they tend. They tend the garden. Plants are watered, beds are fertilized, weeds are removed, regular visits leave the crop stronger. You got to let people know you care. Treat everyone with dignity, respect the uniqueness of every culture. And again, we had 103 nationalities in our office in Geneva. And for example, I was getting feedback one time in one of because we did 360s all the time. I was getting feedback that I was coming across as aloof, and I didn't care. This is back when I was commuting 2 weeks every 2 months back to Geneva. So, and what I'd love to do, I get on the 9 o'clock flight, Minneapolis, Amsterdam, Geneva, get to my apartment at 2 in the afternoon, shower, go to the office. I wanted nothing more than just to flip my laptop up and start working. I was so far behind, but that was giving the impression that I was being aloof. And so what I learned to do is Amsterdam, Geneva, shower, come to the office, do not take your briefcase off your shoulder, walk around and say hello to 104 people. And I'll tell you, my 2 weeks there was so much better by doing that because I let people know I cared. It was just a simple thing to do, but it was really communicated a very powerful message as opposed to sitting on the training floor with my laptop up, trying to catch up, thinking I'd be. And so my lesson learned there was, write this down, fast is slow and slow is fast when you're dealing with people. If you take the time to deal with people, say hello to them, et cetera, my weeks went much better. And if I try to get by not giving the time and letting them know I cared, it was problem after problem after problem. And they knew the answer. They just wanted attention from me going forward. So that was my think about being a gardener versus a chess player in terms of how that plays. Okay, now we get into a little more challenging one in terms of structural reform. And my entire 38 career, I wanted one thing, FTO. What does FTO stand for? Freedom to operate. That's all I've ever asked from Cargill. Give me the freedom to operate. I want to earn my freedom to operate, who I worked with, where I worked, how much I made, how I operated, where I traveled to, where I had my family, et cetera. That was so important for me as a massive motivator going forward here. And how do we, focus on those type things? For me, it was a very big intrinsic motivator for me, et cetera. And that was part of my structural reform. So therefore, if you're at the top of the organization, there's things you probably can do. You may have more choices and things and freedoms than you do necessarily somewhere else lower in the organization. I can appreciate that. You probably have less freedom to operate at times in certain roles with certain managers, especially they tend to be old school, which is another thing we spent a lot of time at Cargill is, Galen, if we are asking you to be an outstanding leader, if I am a terrible leader and I'm your manager, does that give you the excuse to be anything less than the best leader you can be? Tough question. and how much freedom to operate do you have to be, to have your leadership style that you have, as opposed to being, clamped down. And so therefore I had to protect a lot of my traders and people in my business unit from some other individuals in the organization who still were on the command and control regime, but I had to protect them. And so I spent a lot of time to do that. And it's funny, I still run them to today. I saw Ivo and Paulo Souza in Brazil 2 years ago, I think. That's what they remember. They remember how being protected from all these things. Things you can also do in terms of having mission-driven hiring with a diversity of opinion, diversity of experience, diversity of social class. Geographical background can be even more important as opposed to necessarily race and gender. And I think that's where I keep on pushing this point, that those are the diversity things you're looking for, not necessarily, and the secondary part is the race and gender one. Also having well-designed work recognition, we talked about that. Your employee engagement surveys probably will start reflecting that over time. Having very good, vibrant training and development, helping employees grow, recognize where their gifts are, and prepare them for the next job. I heard a quote by Henry Ford last week at a Catholic Life board meeting. Henry Ford said, "The only thing worse than training an employee and having them leave is to not train them and have them stay." And I think it's very insightful, very insightful, very insightful in this day and age. And also, you get to the whole corporate giving and as an encounter of diversity training and all the things we did in Africa. We spent a lot of time in Africa getting 60,000 female farmers in Zambia, trying to get them out of poverty. And we worked with a lot of different organizations to help us do that. So there's things you can do, build these relationships around with public and private partnerships and partnering with other people going forward. But we had worked with 60,000 female farmers. Why female farmers? They would pay us back. It's incredible. We'd lend them the seed, lend them the fertilizer, teach them how to farm, et cetera. They'd go home and cook and da-da-da-da. And their husbands were sitting at home thinking. But these women were out there harvesting, et cetera. And you need 1 ton of corn for a family to live in Zambia for a whole year. We got them to 4 tons per hectare. And so we helped get them out of poverty. And I could tell you all kinds of stories in terms of how they asked us if they could take our money because they had to walk 3 or 4 miles to deposit money in the bank. So we worked with them to take their money and keep it on deposit for them. And so anyway, lots of good things were going on. One thing also I would tell you on the, I think I'll wait with that example. Do I have it? Hang on one sec. Yeah, I think I'll bring it up now. With the structural reforms now, who remembers the Defense of Marriage Act in 2012, if you live here in Minnesota? Defense of Marriage Act? Do you remember? Okay. So there was, I don't know if you remember back, there was a big kerfuffle amongst a lot of major corporations coming out against the Defense of Marriage Act. All the names here is General Mills, large Minneapolis corporations. And so we talked about it at Cargill, whether we also needed to come out. Our Enterprise Resource Group, the LGBT, said, "Oh, absolutely, you need to do that. You need to come out. You need to support that. It's a no-brainer. I'll help write the press release." And I said, "I'm sorry, let's think about that a second. I don't want to do that." And this is the first time, this is actually on an email, I said to the CEO and our leadership group, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm Catholic. This is against, in the spirit of diversity, this is against my Catholic beliefs, and I'm not going to sign off on that." And I put the cards on the table. I may have had to resign if, in fact, they went for it. I'm not sure, but I was willing to do that. I was upset. I was not happy with that. They didn't do it. They've never done it up until now, to the best of my knowledge. I was on a bus in the Ukraine 2 years later. The CEO pulled me aside and said, "Thank you. Thank you for helping us stay on this side of that wall, because once you cross that line and start weighing in on abortion issues, on social issues, which you have no right to do as a CEO, or the corporation speaking as one voice, and you got all these employees underneath going, I don't believe that. I'm not going to stand for that." And you get into a Q&S situation where they quit but stay. Employees, because they no longer honor what the corporation just decided they want to stand for out there in the organization. And so thankfully, I had in a position to have a voice, and the voice was listened to, and Cargill, it worked out. But that was an example that really stuck in my head. And again, it's getting tougher and tougher to do as more organizations are getting pushed to come out on more and more social issues and have an opinion about that under the guise that it's good business. Okay. Next. Okay. So on subsidiary, it's really founded on the dignity of the employees, as we talked about. Galen, you're my man. We're all thinking about your dignity tonight. As it recognizes the call, each has the capacity, and this is how you're going to get people to thrive going forward. Allows persons and groups to develop their skills and talents and abilities. It helps leaders think of the employees as co-workers and colleagues rather than simply as subordinates, and a vision that contributes to building the value of trust relationships. And this is how you get highly engaged employees when you want to do that. And so just to recap, the two important questions on diversity are diversity of what and for what, and it's important that we try to allow the good work that business is meant to be doing in a corporate culture in which employees can develop their gifts and talents for a larger community, such as stakeholders move closer and closer to thriving. And I think it's still Cargill's vision statement, quite frankly, is to thrive. We want employees thriving. We want customers thriving. We want the world to be thriving because we're in it. This whole notion of getting people to thrive, not just exist, but to thrive. And so there's a couple examples. If you've been watching the media, I just pulled these up. I got 3 or 4 of them here. There's this is in the Wall Street Journal. There's a legal assault on corporate diversity efforts has begun. So people are starting to recognize where is this going and what is it delivering, because something's not happening here, and it's falling. It's getting shallow as far as the results are concerned. DEI office are becoming weapons to intimidate. Got there again, the University of Michigan has 163 DEI officers. Ohio State University of Virginia have 94. Virginia Tech has 41 DEI personnel, but only 13 history professors. So even in, and I think it's going to come to a screeching halt. Screeching halt. It's going to get pressure, and rightfully so. So I think the tide is starting to turn. We just remain faithful and keep doing what we can do. Another article that was in The Economist, workplace diversity programs often fail or backfire. Another one here from the Wall Street, that companies quiet diversity and sustainability talk amid culture war boycotts. And we all heard about the Targets and LA Dodgers. Few Americans back businesses wading into current events. You get into those social things we talked about. There's another interesting article. This one is going back to education, DEI, curriculum versus education. And you can see that the diverse perspectives by means of being more inclusive of diverse authors. And diverse and inclusive sounds harmless, but are code words for authors who are racial or sexual minorities. And I think you see that subtly going on in media these days. This is an interesting one here. The politicians, activist, alumni who oppose the program say that they enforce groupthink, they establish arbitrary diversity goals, they lower standards, and they're wasting money that could go to scholarships. There's lawmakers in 19 states that have taken up legislation to limit or block diversity programs. In Texas, there's a $300 billion state budget, prohibits university spending any money on DEI. And lastly, I think there's a great quote from In Canceling the American Mind. It says, show me an organization where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge dominant ideas, lest they be destroyed socially, and I'll show you an organization that's become structurally stupid, unmoored from reality, and unable to achieve its mission. That's candor. That's candor, exactly right. There's another one, and we'll spend time on that one. We got to find a better way, another one that came out on that one. This one is a big differentiator, what clearly is for the common good versus individual preferences and beliefs and biases of the CEO. So, and it goes back, this is actually, I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, Dr. Michael and I, this is a paper, it's public, you can get on it. I think you can send them wherever Roger is at. Where'd he go? There he is, yeah. You can send them the link if people are interested in the long paper. And then there's also a short one that got published in terms of why Catholic institutions should take and leave from the diversity movement. You can hit the link and do that. I'm going to give you one plug. I'm on the board of Catholic Rural Life. I left some brochures down there. We're having two great speakers at our 100th anniversary. Cardinal Tim Dolan and Monsignor James Shea will be there May 8th. You can sign up. There's cards I left there at the table, and you can even sponsor a table if you like. And that is going to end my presentation. So, I don't know if you have time for Q&A or
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to take a little time for Q&A. Make them good ones because we only have about 6-7 minutes.
Okay.
But yeah.
Softballs, please.
In the employee engagement survey, you said emphasize 3 things.
Yeah.
Could you
Say, stay, and support.
Can you say something about it?
Well, I think it's important because ultimately, if you want highly engaged employees, and I think when our business unit in Geneva, we started out at 50%, we ended up at 75. 75 is world class. And it's hard staying there because all the low-hanging fruit is we need a different air conditioner. Okay, we'll get you a different air conditioner. You start getting into the intrinsic things of self-actualization; those are harder to hold it at 75 once you've done it through various cycles. And if you've got employees willing to say positive things about Cargill, stay at Cargill, that they're willing, not planning to leave, they're willing to stay, and they're willing to support Cargill. I mean, say, stay, and support. I mean, you got to engage employees. And even if you're at 75%, I'm still looking for those last couple stragglers who are not engaged because they're the blueberry. You got to deal with them. Yes?
Emery, you work for a privately held corporation.
Yep.
There's a lot of publicly traded companies that are having these same issues, not just with DEI, but ESG,
Yep.
with DEI infused into that. Do you have any insights on the pressures that the publicly traded companies may be dealing with that are a little bit different than what you saw at Cargill? And especially in light of some of the investment companies out there like BlackRock,
Yeah.
Vanguard, State Street that are putting excess pressure on these publicly traded companies.
Yep. And I think Glass Lewis and ISS, those are the two rating agencies that sell their goods just like a lot of the consultants are selling their DEI training. It's a big business, right? And so ISS and Glass Lewis get with shareholders or get with large organizations that you better do this. We're going to rate you low. If you get rate you low, we're not, boards are not going to get reelected. They all kinds of fear. It's playing not to lose, quite frankly. No one tells you how you're going to run a better business. So I think that's ultimately we're going to have to go through that cycle. And I think I've seen some cracks. I've seen, and on one of the boards I'm on, things have toned down some. We're not tossed out of the window, but clearly a subtle change in direction. So I hear you in terms of the pressures, but we have to be clear where those are coming from relative to, again, rating agencies, ISS, on their investors, and they put it back on the corporations, and it comes down into management. So anyway, I hear you, and it's going to be a journey. It's something we just need to pray and count on our Mother Mary to help us wade and guide through this, and have the courage to stand up when we're supposed to stand up, and the courage to shut up when we need to shut up. And that's always a grace to do that.
Isn't the AICPA even involved in that, creating standards for, global warming and so forth?
From the ESG, they may be, right. Any other questions? Yes?
Any chance you would make that presentation available?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. I think I could probably do that. I'm going to take my notes out of it, though. I can probably do that. I don't know what you're going to do with it. I don't want to read about it on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever, X or whatever it's called.
Went through a few pages there, especially at the end, about articles.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm going, man, I'd really love to have that time.
Yeah, okay,
Back and reference.
okay,
Save it as a PDF, not as a PowerPoint.
okay, okay. All right, we'll think of something. I'll talk to Roger and see what we can do and put it out there and maybe put it on your website. Well, I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, I think it's just a journey. My experience, Dr. Michael Naughton's book, well, the paper that we wrote together, I think there's a lot of interesting articles on a lot of my experiences are actually in the paper, in the long one, not in the short one. The short one, you just 10,000 words. Oh, getting the truth out quick. Oh, thank you very much. I love being with this group and engaging with you and help thinking through these things. Because no one's got the right, 100% of the solution. I think we just need to stick together, keep praying. I think as you encourage people to do that, and count on St. Joseph to help us. So,
Okay, I had a really big takeaway here.
what's that?
Okay, subsidiarity is kind of hard to explain,
Yeah.
and you did a wonderful job. Subsidiarity is freedom to operate, and that's what people need, because if they go from employees to entrepreneurs to self-responsible people, and they're going to be more valuable to everybody.
Right. Now, let me just, I fully agree with that. There's one qualifier, because a lot of times you get, you want to push the decision-making down to the appropriate level, not necessarily the lowest level, because often the people at the lowest level don't have the visibility of what they're going to do, how that impacts someone else in the organization. So it's got to be at the right level, and not all the way down to the shop, the welder on the shop floor, you're making decisions about what we're going to do with McDonald's on chicken McNuggets or whatever, because he has no visibility on that. So it's got to be at the right level. So I think in general, you're absolutely right.
But we've also seen where people at the shop floor, they don't have any say-so.
Yep.
People ignore them, they have a bad attitude.
Yep.
And they've done studies where CEOs worked on the shop floor and went, they're right.
Yeah.
Because they,
Sorry, could
Yeah.
you say that again?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I think to engage the hearts and minds of all your employees, including the ones on the shop floor, because they deserve the respect also. Okay, thank you very much.